Hello, my name is Marissa Hazelhoon, and this is my cult phase interview video for Aurora Hills Middle School. Just a little background about me before I get started. I graduated from the University of Kansas in December of 2020 with a double major in English and secondary English education with a minor in business. I am pursuing my master's in English online from Ohio University. That's starting in May. Whoop, whoop. Um, I am currently at St. James Academy in Lenexa, Kansas. I teach honors English for to seniors and AP Lang for to juniors. But I have experience in middle school through my student teaching and my practicum, and I loved it. I would love to return to middle school from this experience. I am looking to relocate to the Aurora, Denver area this coming school year just for a change of pace. I'm looking for some place where with a little bit more diversity and a little bit more personal and professional freedom teaching wise, and I can kind of get into that a little bit later. That's just a little bit about me. I thought a lot about how I wanted to put together this interview video, and the more I thought about it, the more I figured that the most authentic way for me to explain who I am as an educator is for me to literally sit down and explain who I am as an educator. So this is just going to be me explaining who I am. No fancy fireworks, no action sequences, no explosions. Just me talking and explaining how who I am as an educator and why I think I would be a good fit at Aurora Hill. So the first question that I'm going to address is, with which cartoon character do you share the most personality traits, and be specific about the traits? Now, I love this question the first time I read it. I'm a very introspective person, so I got really excited. I was like, "Oh, yes, this is a perfect question." This reminds me of a type of checking question that I would ask my students for attendance. So, very excited. I asked around. I thought a lot about it by myself. I asked my friends and family. I was like, and I think my favorite answer came from my sister, so it's the one I have to go with. She said that I am most like Rafiki from The Lion King. Now, if you don't know The Lion King or Rafiki, I'm going to give you a little bit of background. So, Lion King is this story about it's essentially Hamlet, but like make it Animal Kingdom. So there's this lion. His father dies kind of early on in his childhood. So he runs away, doesn't really think about it. Then eventually he's called back to be the leader of kind of the Animal Kingdom. Um, it's really fun. Highly recommend this Disney movie if you have not seen it. Um, Rafiki is the monkey character. He's kind of like the wise advisor person. Um, if you've ever seen like a video, a meme, a picture, what have you, of like the Lion King, like the monkey lifting up Simba. It's like Rafiki is the monkey who is lifting up the lion, um, and my sister's like, you remind me a lot of Rafiki, and the more individual, that's just who I am, and I own it. And so does Rafiki. He doesn't pretend to be somebody he's not. He is very confident in who he is, and so am I. Like I learned this very early in my teaching experience, that I can't really pretend to be like a normal, very like uh, I don't want to say professional because that sounds bad, but like a very like stuffy professor type educator. That's just not who I am. I'm a very odd duck of a person, and I own that. That's just part of my teaching style, and I think that Rafiki and I kind of share that unique, like, we are who we are, and we're not gonna, we're just gonna vibe with it. Um, Another way that we're alike is that he is kind of the mentor figure to Simba. So he goes and he finds him. He's like, "You are the leader. You need to step up." Um, and me being a teacher, obviously, I'm kind of that mentor role. I don't really a, like an education system where I stand up and I lecture all the time. That's not something that I'm interested in. I would much rather be a mentor to the students to kind of guide them in their learning, much less this very authoritarian type of educator thing. And that's kind of where Rafiki comes from too. Is he's much more the guide. He's much more the mentor. He's not going to tell Simba what he should do. He's just kind of like, maybe you should think about going. Um, Another way that we're alike is that we're both very forward thinking. A quote of Rafiki's that I really like is, "The past can hurt, but the way I see it, you can either run from it or you can learn from it." And I like that because it comes with the impression that, like, we're not going to be stuck in the past, we're not going to stand still in the present, but we're going to move toward the future, and we're going to learn from, but we're not going to forget about the past, though. We're not going to like shove it in a box and never think about it ever again. We're going to learn from it. We're going to take our past mistakes and we're going to learn from them. And that's something that I think I do really well in my classroom too. I'm very mastery centered. For example, I allow corrections on all of my essays as an English teacher. I allow all of my students to do corrections because the way I think that they learn best is by correcting their mistakes. And if they correct their mistakes and they do that work, then why shouldn't they get a better grade because of it? So I offer corrections for full points back. That's just something that I do, and that's something that I plan to continue into my further educate when I move into future educator roles. Excuse me. Um, yeah, so that's one example of kind of the mastery level education that I kind of favor. Um, I also think that that highlights a growth mindset, and I'm also very growth mindset oriented as well. I like to learn. I like to improve, um, and that kind of goes along with this very collaborative spirit that I have. I like working with other people. That's how I learn best. And I'll kind of expand on that later on in the video as well. But I work best when I can bounce off of people, when I can work as a team. So PLCs are really important to me, grade level content, whatever. Finding those people I can rely on is something that's really important to me as an educator. And that also transitions into my classroom too. I don't just like individualistic learning. I utilize full class. I utilize small groups as well. I think we learn best in a very collaborative work atmosphere. Again, not somewhere where I am just standing in front. The next question I'm going to address is, what do you know about Aurora Hills Middle School? Now, I'll be completely honest, I don't know as much as an Aurora, Denver native might, not being from the area. I'm from Kansas. However, I have heard, I have information from people who are from the area. Also, I've done a lot of sleuthing through the APS website and the Aurora Hills actual website. I know that your demographics, you're mostly made up of Black and Latinx students, that you have about a third of your students as ELLs. and about, I think 80%, I think it was 80% of free and reduced lunch. I think if I remembered all of the stats correctly. So high diversity, lots of different cultures and etc. Represented, and that's exactly the kind of school that I want to teach in. I want a little bit more diversity than I've been exposed to in Kansas, just as a professional. I also saw that you have 43 out of your, I think, 80 staff members with a higher education, or like with more with a master's, PhD, etc. And I thought that was really cool. As I mentioned earlier, I'm pursuing my master's in English as well, starting in May. So I thought that that was a really cool statistic, and hopefully we can make it 44 next year. Whoop whoop. Looking on your website, and specifically, I noticed in your purpose statement something that really caught my eye, and that is something that I'm really passionate about. So, and I'm quoting here from your website: Aurora Hills strategically and relentlessly ignites learners to develop the knowledge and skills to responsibly lead the Aurora Hills community to think globally and act locally. That think globally and act locally is like, ah, that is something that's so near and dear to my heart. That's how I structure my classroom. Just that, like, if I can go off for a second, but it's an interview video, so why not? I the just the cool thing about education is that we live in this big, amazing, wonderful, phenomenal world, and education can bring it all into the classroom. I can, especially English education, like I can pull from different countries, different cultures, different authors. I can pull texts, experiences, all of these things into the classroom and inspire and empower students to then act locally, to really think about their own communities and how they can utilize the education that they receive in my classroom in their own communities. And I think that that is so so cool, because that's what education is supposed to do. It's supposed to make you think globally, think about this really big, amazing, wonderful world, and then bring it to your hometown, to bring it to some place, or some people, a community, a demographic who needs it, and who needs that education. And I that's something that I'm really passionate about, and that's something that like really struck a chord with in me, educator wise. So I love that purpose statement. It really resonates with me. Some things that I would love to know about Aurora Hills is, I do see in your priorities, the data systems and structures, that teachers collaborate weekly to analyze formative data, which leads me to believe that you have at least weekly PLC meetings, which is something that I really enjoy and find very valuable. Like I said earlier, I work best if I can collaborate within a team, so PLCs are definitely something that I'm interested in. So I would like to know kind of what PLCs look like at Aurora Hills, and what that kind of collaborative atmosphere is. Like, how often do you meet? What are the norms? What are the goals? Do you do grade level? Do you do content? Do you do both? How often? That's kind of something that I would like to know. Additionally, I would like to know what the mentoring program looks like at Aurora Hills. I've heard that APS has a wonderful mentoring program as a district, but I was just curious on how that looked at Aurora Hills specifically. Like, would I get a more mentor teacher? Do I get an admin? What does that look like? How is it different from the district wide? um, that's just something that I'm curious about. Again, I like collaborating and bouncing ideas off of this, particularly if the person has a couple more years in the game, if you know what I'm saying. I know that I'm a new teacher, and I know that I don't know everything. So having that mentor who has been around the block a couple of times and knows what education is all about. Having that person take me under their wing is something that's really important to me and my professional development. Next question that I'm going to address is, why should your families trust me to help educate their kids? And I'm going to kind of address that in three separate points. Um, the first point is that I am an engaging educator. I am really enthusiastic. I get very passionate about the content and just about education in general. Um, I like to tell my students that they can't out weird me. Um, just because like I am Rafiki, like I'm just this like odd duck. I'm very confident in who I am, and so you can't like feel out of place or weird in my classroom. Like it, I pull students in. I get really passionate, and not to toot my own horn, but you know this is an interview video, so like why not? Um, I think that my engagement is really infectious. I get the students really excited about the content as well. Um, there's something to be said about really demonstrating your passion to your students in a way that makes them really passionate about it too. I know English can be one of those subjects that it's kind of like hit or miss. Like you either really like writing papers and reading a lot of books, or you kind of like hate it. Um, I think I do a really good job of balancing those two out. I harness the passion of those students who really love English and writing and reading, and I lift those and kind of tow the other ones with us. Being this kind of type of really engaging, passionate educator is something that's really important for middle school in particular. High school, it's important too, but for middle schoolers as a population, that I like to say that middle schoolers are very like in a really unique position. They are just coming from from elementary school, so they're like just older than like little baby children, but they're transitioning into like high school. So they're being given more responsibility, more is being expected of them, but not all of the times are they given the knowledge, resources, information, skill set, etc., to really empower them to make to take on those responsibilities. So I think that's kind of where a lot of this like middle school angst type, you know, the stereotypical angry middle schooler that we all like heard about. I think that's kind of where that comes from, is that they have like all of these feelings and opinions that they're kind of just now starting to develop from elementary school. They're kind of starting to, you know, strike out on their own, learn a little bit, kind of get their own like really solid identity, and really questioning the world around them. But they don't really know how to do that yet. And I think as middle school teachers, we're in a really cool position to teach them how to do that. Like that's so cool to me. That's so cool to me because I feel like sometimes in high school you get really distracted on like what does the future hold? Like we need to be preparing you for the future. Like you need to go out. Like what are your future plans? Like what are you going to do after high school? Like what job are you going to do? How are you going to contribute to society? And we get so future focused that we don't give them the proper skills to focus on the now and how to improve themselves now. And so that kind of starts in middle school. Um, and I think that's just so cool that we're in that really unique position to really focus on who they are as people. I like to utilize social emotional learning a lot in my classroom, especially for middle school classrooms. So I mentioned the check-in questions earlier. That's just one of the ways that I like to do. I like to ask a question for attendance, and I answer it first, and then I go around the room and we all answer it. And sometimes they're funny questions like, "Is hot dog a sandwich?" Um, It's not a hot dog is a hot dog. Just by the way, we can argue about it if you want to, but like a hot dog's. But anyway, or and sometimes they're kind of deeper or more reflection questions for my seniors that I have right now. One of the questions I asked was, "What advice would you give to yourself 5 years ago?" 5 years ago, I was a freshman in college, so I said that I told them that I would have been nicer to myself as a freshman because, like, as a freshman in college, you think that you should have it all put together, but you don't as a new adult. And 5 years ago, my seniors were eighth graders, so they were just coming into middle school, or they were just finishing middle school, excuse me, and they were just coming into high school. And so it was like, think back to who you were as an eighth grader and what you know now as seniors and what you would tell your little baby eighth grade self. And it ended up being like a really cool conversation on like who they were as middle schoolers and how they've kind of changed and adjusted. Um, and I don't know, it took like 10 minutes at the very beginning of class, but it ended up being really a really cool, reflective conversation. Another activity I like to do is I call it writing. Uh, I mean, you essentially write a letter to yourself, but it's an email, so you don't have to worry about losing the letter, like a physical letter. There's this website, if you want it, let me know, where you can write an email to yourself and schedule it for a date in the future, and then it'll deliver it to you. And so I had to do it in one of my ed classes, and I thought that it was phenomenal. I've had every class that I've had since then do it, and it's always really interesting to get that letter from your past self, and then you can see kind of what you thought was important to tell your future self, like what goals you had, have you achieved those goals. And I keep it really like goal centered. I was like, when we do it initially, I say like, outline some goals that you want yourself to achieve, where you think you're going to be, what kind of person you think you're going to be. And then when you receive it in the future, do some reflection, like think about the goal, like what goals were important to yourself back then and what changed about them. Are those goals still important to you? Did you achieve those goals? Did you not, or did you kind of achieve those goals? How so? So I had my seniors do it, and I was like, have it deliver to you in December. And then shoot me an email about what happened, because I want to know, after you've graduated and gotten a whole semester of college, trade school, a career, whatever you were doing under your belt. What's going on? What happened? Like, reflect and shoot me an email, because I want to know. I'm invested in your future. So those are just a couple of activities that I do. I really value social emotional learning, um, teaching students to be their own personality, really like solidify problem solving skills too, critical thinking skills. I think that's something that's really that folds into English education really well, is the critical analysis and like really analyzing the problem solving, because that's something that folds in really well with literature. Um, so yeah, circling it back to the middle school education, I really value the social emotional learning, just because middle school is a weird time, and I think as a middle school teacher, that's kind of our job, is to help these students navigate this this kind of odd time, and to give them the skills and the tools to take on that responsibility and really go somewhere with it too. Idea kind of directly translates into my second point, which is that I'm a very student centered educator. So not only am I really concerned with the individual middle schooler, with their problem solving, with their critical thinking, with their social emotional piece, really lifting up the individual, but I really let the students kind of guide my I let the students guide my education practices. What I do in the classroom, it's really centered around the student. Um, This means that I utilize student feedback a lot. I think my students are are almost annoyed with how often I ask them for feedback. I'm constantly asking them like, is this helpful? Is this not helpful? Like, communicate with me. Like, is this good? Do I need to adjust it? Do you understand? What questions do you have? I'm consistently asking asking for their feedback and their input consistently through lessons and before and after activities as well. An example of this specifically is actually a couple of weeks ago I was teaching this lesson on feminist theory and feminist critical like literary theory. So taking for context, taking feminism and looking at a text with it and kind of analyzing the different gender oppressions within the text. So I was teaching them how to do that, what feminism was, what feminist critical theory was. It was a little lesson with that, and I started with an activity. And I can get a little bit more specific with the activity itself if you would like me to. Just let me know. However, the focus is not on the activity itself. The focus is on the after the activity. Um, Moral of the story is the activity did not go so well. The men in my class were not as respectful of the activity highlighted gender oppression, and the men in my class were not as respectful of the activity as the women in my class. And I knew this up to a certain point, but I figured that it was due to some discomfort, some unfamiliarity with the content. So I didn't address it initially until one of my female students raised her hand. We were reflecting after the activity itself, like what we learned, how it went. Again, reflection, asking for the feedback. What they learned, what was the purpose of the activity, etc. Really get into that reflection. And she said, I feel like the boys are not taking this seriously and I'm mad about it. And I was like, oh, okay, cool, great, I see you, awesome. Dudes, do we not understand the purpose of this activity? Do we not understand why we did it? Like, communicate with me. What's going on? And I kind of, so I kind of waited. I sat there, like, do we not communicate with me? Use words. Use your words. What's going on? What are we thinking? And after, after a while, this one male student said, I'll be completely honest. I don't understand why we did this activity. And I was like, okay, explain, expand. Why don't you understand why we did this activity? What about it don't you understand? He's like, well, I just don't understand why we did this activity that like highlighted oppression because like we all understand that like women are oppressed. Like, duh, like that's like we get it. We understand it. We've talked about it before. Like, I don't understand why we had to do this activity that just like brought it up again. Like I feel like it was kind of pointless. Like, okay, all right. Does anybody else feel like girls, boys, anybody? Do we not feel like we understood the activity? And all the girls were like, no, we understood the activity, we understood the purpose. And we're like, okay, gentlemen, what's how do we feel about this statement? Do we agree? Do we disagree? What about? And again, I got kind of like, I was like, okay, clearly we're uncomfortable. We don't understand the activity. Let me explain it to you. And I went through this whole explanation that essentially amounted to that women have been oppressed for for many years, and if we don't continue to talk about it, then nothing will get solved. And I was like, so that's why we did this activity, because even though you might not know that women are oppressed, they are still oppressed, and so it needs to be highlighted, it needs to be talked about. And he's like, okay. I'm like, do you understand now? Do you understand why I did this specific activity? And he was like, yes, I understand now. I'm like, okay, cool, good. let's move on. And we went through the lesson. I explained what feminism was, yada yada, etc. And I was reflecting in the moment and thinking about how it went. And I wasn't exactly sure if I had thoroughly validated that one girl's feelings, because she said that she was mad, but I wasn't sure that I handled it as completely as I should have as an educator. So after class that day, I held the girls back. I dismissed the boys, held the girls back, and I'm like, hey, I just wanted to touch base because I realized that one, the boys were not as respectful as they should have, and I should have um, done better at kind of mitigating that. But I also realized that you were mad, and I want to make sure that I address that in the way that I should have. So what should I have done differently, and what can I do to further fix the issue now moving forward? And I sat there. And at first, all of them were like, I mean, yeah, we're kind of fine. Like, it was fun. They were probably just uncomfortable. It was okay. But I was like, no, like, I get that they were uncomfortable, but like, that doesn't discount your feelings. That doesn't discount your anger. I want to make sure that I did what I need to do as an educator. And they're like, it wasn't your fault. It wasn't your fault. And I'm like, I'm not saying it was my fault, but I am saying that as an educator and as a new educator, that I need to know how to better handle the situation in the future. So what can I do? What can I do in future? Like if I was going to teach this again, what can I do differently to make sure that this anger does not happen, or to make sure that I properly address it? And they were like, well, maybe moving forward, you just do better prepping the activity. Say that like they need to be respectful, and that like everybody should be respectful and not like laugh or make fun of it or make it into a joke, that that's a serious thing. I'm like, that is completely valid and fair. Yes, I didn't do that. You are completely right, and I will make sure to do that in the future. Thank you for that note. Is there anything else that I can do currently to make the situation better and to validate your anger? And they're like, no, I think you did well in the moment. I think you did well kind of mitigating that in the moment. And I was like, okay, if that's, I'm just double checking, making sure that I did all by you that I needed to. If you think of something else, shoot me an email. I just wanted to check in. And we ended up having a really productive conversation on like their feelings toward the activity, their feelings toward the boys' reaction to it, and it was really productive and very productive for me too. Again, I'm a new teacher; I don't know it all, so it was nice to know that like this was a good activity. It just like this one part needed tweaking, and at the very end, they were like, "Thank you, Ms. Hazelhoon, for asking and checking in with us. Like, we really appreciate it. Like, we feel very validated." And I was like, yes, good. I'm so glad. Perfect. That's what I wanted. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to validate you and make sure that you were okay. Just one of the many ways that I have utilized feedback that within my lessons. I took that and I learned from it, and I definitely, if I ever do that lesson again, I will definitely utilize that feedback. Other ways that I utilize student feedback is with end of unit surveys. So just like a quick Google form that I send out at the end of units, asking them like what activities did work in the unit, what activities didn't work, what activities helped them learn the most. I think that's an important question as well. Just to kind of gauge what I did well and what I can do better. So for in my AP lane for my juniors, overwhelmingly after my first unit that I taught for them, overwhelmingly, they said, maybe a lecture with guided notes. So I essentially lectured to them, and I gave them note sheets with like, sentence stems that they could fill in. And they said it was kind of helpful, but it was really stressful because sometimes you went too fast, and sometimes I missed one, and it was really stressful. I was focusing more on like filling out the note sheet as opposed to like actually listening to what you were saying. And I was like, okay, Cool. Reworking it. I actually the next lesson after I sent out these um, end of unit surveys, I had planned to be a guided note lecture, and so scrapped it. Nope, didn't work, didn't help. We weren't going to do it. And overwhelmingly, kind of going back to the survey, overwhelmingly they said that anything that where they had to do small groups, they loved. They thought that they really helped being able to collaborate, which like I should have seen coming. That's how I learn best too. So I was like, okay, instead of doing a guided notes activity, we're now doing a group notes activity. So I basically split them up into a bunch of small groups, assigned each group a different topic within the notes, and I had them research on different websites and kind of write on a shared Google Doc amongst the whole class. So each group got a different like question or topic that they had to take notes on. And at the end of, I gave them like 20 minutes to work on it. So at the end of 20 minutes, each group had to present what their topic was and what they found out. And so at the end of the day, all the same content was delivered, except they did it. It was very student driven as opposed to me driven, and they loved it. They learned. So, I feel like they were more engaged. I feel like they learned a lot better and more thoroughly. So we've been doing a whole lot more small group activities since. So immediately utilized that student feedback and implemented it in my lessons and saw an immediate improvement. Other way that I'm a student centered educator, transitions right into my third point, which is that I base my classroom around a culturally relevant pedagogy. This is kind of based in a lot of readings that I've done by Laura Gladstone Billings. Love her, she's phenomenal. Like what a anyway, what a phenomenal educator and writer. I am obsessed with her work. But essentially, this means that I make each student's culture relevant within my classroom. I not only just like mention it, but I take each of their cultures and really utilize it in my classroom. And I use that as what I base my teaching on. And that's true. I take each individual and I empower them through where they come from, what identity they are, and like I've mentioned before, one of the ways that I do this is I like to pull different authors and different texts from around the world, from all different walks of life. So different countries, different races, different ethnicities, different backgrounds, different ability levels, different um, genders, different orientations. Like the sky is the limit. There is such a big world of knowledge out there, and there are several, like each student is unique and each student is different, and really making sure that I pull from a wider range of topics, of experiences, and of authors is really important in making those students feel heard and seen and relevant. I think another one of the like most basic, simplest ways that I incorporate culturally relevant pedagogy within my classroom is just being open and honest with my students. Um, I'm just gonna put it bluntly. I know that I don't look like a lot of your students. I don't. I know that I don't come from the same background or area or culture from as your students do. I don't. I just don't. And that's not something that I can change. But what I can change is my education level about it, my experience, and that's something that I utilize within the classroom, is acknowledging that, not ignoring it, not ignoring the fact that we have different experiences, but using those for very productive conversations. How are we different and why? What about society is makes us different? And you really utilizing those productive conversations. And I'll get to that, but like talking about how that contributes to things like the opportunity gap, to systemic racism, like really utilizing those experiences and those differences in experiences to make productive conversations, and have those conversations kind of drive what we do in the class. Another way that I utilize this pedagogy within my classroom is using education and their culture together to really empower them as students. I was talking with one of my educator friends. She is also an English educator. And we were talking the other day about how education is really unique in being utilized to empower traditionally disenfranchised and oppressed groups and identities. Um, it's it can be easy for minority groups to look at education as another way to oppress them, and I get it. Like you're legally obligated to go to some sort of education until you're 16, and then you can kind of like drop out in most places. So as a middle schooler, you're kind of stuck. So it can seem I can see how it could seem really binding to a lot of different um, traditionally disenfranchised and oppressed middle schoolers who are already like kept down and oppressed by many different parts of society, let alone education. However, when you kind of reframe what education can look like, suddenly the opportunities open up. You these groups, these minority groups, can utilize education for their own benefit. They can harness that power and gain more knowledge that not might not have been available to them before. They can learn more, and like knowledge is power. That's really what it comes down to. And when you gain more knowledge, you gain better tactics on how to fight the systems that oppress you, and that's what education does. It's giving you the tools to better yourself and better the community you live in and better society in general. And that that's something that I was also really excited about when I looked at your purpose statement, is to think globally, act locally. So you think globally, you learn about all of the other different uh, cultures and identities, and you utilize all of this information, and then you use it to empower yourself and to really better yourself and better your community. One of the I planned a unit like kind of about this topic when I was in my undergrad. And I haven't been able to enact it yet, but I would really, really love to at some point in my teaching career. Essentially, it was like a knowledge is power through literature. And we read texts like The Book Thief and Fahrenheit 451. And I paired it with different texts like Reading is Education by Malcolm X, the different kind of texts like that, really showing how like education, but specifically like literary education, can be harnessed and improve yourselves. And the kind of final project of that unit was this library box. And I don't know if you know what library boxes are, but I'll give you a little bit of background information on that too. Library boxes are essentially these boxes that have books in them. They kind of look like mailboxes, but they're bigger and have like books in them. And um, they're put like scattered through neighborhoods, and essentially it's like take a book, leave a book type of thing. So they're kind of like libraries, like public libraries, except they're in neighborhoods. So for people who don't have like the transportation available to them, can just walk up to this library box, grab a book, read it, return it, grab another book, et cetera, et cetera. And so once we kind of read all of these texts, had discussions, different activities with them, their final was, okay, so where, now that you've learned that knowledge is power through literature, where do these where do you think these library boxes would do the most good? Design one that would be the best fit, and tell me where it should go in your community. And so the idea is for them to really think critically about the world that they live in, about their own communities, and where best that this like very powerful piece of infrastructure, honestly, would be, and where would it be the most powerful. So I planned for them to get into groups. They had to design a box for themselves, and then they had to present their box. And hopefully with different materials, maybe we build a box, maybe we vote on a box that's the best, and then we get to place it there. That would be really cool. I could easily also see how this could be an interdisciplinary unit between history and English, or math and English. The designing the box, that could be like an architecture, sizing, measurements type thing. I don't know. I'm an English person for a reason, but math. Or honestly, all three. Why not just do all three together? English is everywhere. Do it with history. Do it with math. Do it with both. Woo! But that's that's a unit that I would really love to do at some point during my teaching career. That really kind of holds dear this idea that knowledge is power for especially traditionally disenfranchised and oppressed groups. The last question that I'm going to address is, how would I explain the existence of the opportunity gap, and what is my role in closing the gap? I really appreciate the verbiage of this question. That's what I'm going to address initially, because I think to talk about the existence of the opportunity gap, you have to talk about what it was beforehand. When I went to school, I learned about the achievement gap, and I so much better appreciate this verbiage utilized within this question too, because when you say achievement gap, uh, the kind of like immediate assumption with it is that it's something wrong with the student, that the student isn't achieving something, that there's something wrong with who they are as a person. And since the achievement gap statistically refers to Black, Latinx, historically disenfranchised and oppressed groups, um, it really kind of widens that stigma, because it's insinuating that because they are part of these disenfranchised and oppressed groups, that is why they are not achieving, and that is absolutely ridiculous. It's not about the student. It is not about their achievement. It is about the opportunities that are given to them. Um, so that so I appreciate that the transition of verbiage is essentially what I'm saying, that it really is a difference of opportunities, of the things that they are allowed to do, of the things that they are given, the opportunities that they are lent within their lives. That's really where the gap lies, is with the opportunities, not with the achievements. um, the existence of it specifically, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It has to deal with systemic racism. It really does. Um, that's I don't want to say that's all there is to it, because like that's not, but it's systemic racism. It's what is historically and statistically preventing historically oppressed identities from getting the opportunities that they need to be as successful as their you know white, hetero, male, etc. counterparts, and that's what it is. It's systemic racism. It's all parts of our society that's also contributing to education, and education is a 110% part of that system that is contributing to this opportunity gap. I was just talking to a fellow teacher of mine today about not about the opportunity gap specifically, but about systemic racism in education. We were talking about redlining and how redlining contributes to systemic racism. And we were like, well, students should be able to choose which schools they go to, and it shouldn't be dictated by where they live and the districts that they live in. Like that's and redlining is something that definitely contributes to the opportunity gap and this and is perpetuated by systemic racism as well, because it's not only affected by the education, but it's also affected by mortgages, by laws, by legal stuff. It's a system that all works together to keep those opportunities from oppressed groups. But these opportunities are, or lack of opportunities, I guess I could say, show up in so many different ways, from the lack of resources, of educational resources that you get, from the lack of transportation money to go to for field trips to go to different museums, art galleries, etc. Like some schools don't have the money for that because of this opportunity gap, because of systemic racism, because of the attitudes for toward these schools. Like they just don't get as much funding. If you to focus in on one simple thing, if a student doesn't have an updated textbook. Think about that. Updated textbook. Textbooks cost money. If you don't have the funding to get new textbooks, you have to rely on last year's textbooks. And when you have to rely on last year's textbooks, because year after year after year, you don't have the money to buy new textbooks, suddenly you're using textbooks from like the 80s. And while like some people may look at that and like, oh, it's a textbook, it's information, it's education, that textbook is 30 years old. It's 30 years old. That it has outdated information. We're constantly learning new things all the time. And to use a textbook in a classroom that's 30 years old is just honest, it's contributing to this opportunity gap. It's not educating the students properly. It's not giving them the most updated information. It's not giving them the information needed to empower them. And so just something as simple as textbooks, and that's just like the tip of the just ginormous iceberg that contributes to this opportunity gap. Just a simple thing like textbooks, and the difference between having a new textbook as opposed to one from the 80s. Just that difference contributes to the opportunity gap, because now one student who's learning from this 30-year-old textbook doesn't have the information that this other student has, and they're immediately at a disadvantage. This student is immediately at a disadvantage because they don't have as current, as updated, and as full of information and education as this other student does. Now, I believe that I have a couple of different roles in helping close this gap. The first one is as an educator. Now, I know that sounds a little bit weird because like I am an educator, but it just goes back to my previous point that knowledge is power, and it's up to me to give our students the education needed to empower them and the information needed to really like empower them to change the society, to change their communities, to really go out and again to empower them to make a change, to support them in making that change. And I feel like that's what an educator does, is educate. An educator is supposed to educate. So purveying this knowledge to really like give them this knowledge to use as power. That's one of the most important things, is like giving them the knowledge and the tools necessary, those intellectual tools necessary to help start closing that gap, to start fighting against it as their population, as who they are. The second role that I have is as an advocate. It's not enough. It's not enough to just give them the information. I I also need to advocate for them. I need to fight for my students. I can't just like let them do all of the work. They're middle schoolers. Like, yes, they're in a really unique position where they can learn and they can grow and they can become really productive members of their community and of society, but they're still middle schoolers. Like, unfortunately, we're in a society that really doesn't necessarily listen to middle schoolers in the way that they listen to adults. So it's my job to speak when their voices aren't heard, to lift them up, to again and like empower them, but also empower myself to speak up for them, to fight for them, to fight for that systemic change, to fight for more resources, to fight to close that opportunity gap, to fight for more resources, to fight for newer textbooks. Darn it. but that's but that's what I'm here for. I'm not only here to just give them the information. I'm here to demonstrate how to use that information as a productive member of society, because does it matter if I talk the talk if I can't walk the walk? No, I have to do both. I have to educate and then I also have to advocate. Those are two very intertwined and important roles that I would have to play in closing this achievement gap. In closing, I'm a really passionate and engaging educator who focuses on the students in everything that I do. The student drives my education practice, and the student advocates the voice that I take out into the community as well. I fight for my students, I fight for who they are as people, I include their culture, their identities within the classroom, and I strive to make them not only, uh, better in ELA, but also just better people as well. And I hope to learn a little something along the way as well. Um, I hope to get the opportunity to kind of expand on anything and everything in this video, and really then again emphasize the passion that I have for education and the content that I teach and the students I teach as well. Um, if you have any questions about anything that I talked about in this video, feel free to reach out to me. You have my email, it's listed on my resume. It's also listed within the application. But I really hope to get the opportunity to speak with you in the next phase of the interview and really prove how much I want to work with your students and how much I want to work within the community that holds this think globally, act locally idea so dear as I do. Um, yeah, I never know how to I never know how to end videos like this, but feel free to reach out if you have any questions or if you would like to move forward, and I really hope you do. Um, Thank you for taking the time to watch my video and giving me the opportunity to express my passion for education and for students.